nervous.
And if everyone could just actually mute themselves, the panelists included. Freya, mute yourself. No, I'm kidding. Okay, let's see. How many people do we have? HC, are you admitting people?
Yeah, people are just automatically coming in.
People are coming in? Okay. All right, so we'll just wait just another minute to see if we can get some more people to come in. But the good news is that all of this stuff is being recorded to our live stream and then will be available to view asynchronously at another time. So, you know, this is all recorded content, which is great. We've got lots of things to see. Okay, I'm just gonna get started because we don't have any time to waste and everyone's here. So welcome everybody to the EFA new member panel. My name is Natalia Nakazawa. I use she, her pronouns. And I am the assistant director for the EFA studio program. I've been here for a little over 8 years, so it's been a long haul and an amazing one. I had the honor of curating this past exhibition of our 9 new members who we will meet tonight. That is Alan Ball, Laura Anderson, Anderson Barbata, Odette England, Jason File, Katya Grokhovsky, Anina Major, Nazanin Noroozi, Whitney Oldenburg, and Susan Silas. So I'm looking forward to a very exciting presentation tonight. Okay, so just so a few notes about conduct during the presentation. Please keep your microphones muted. That's to avoid distracting noises. There will be a Q&A session at the end. So if you have questions, you can sort of put them into the chat for the moment, and then at the end we'll ask you to open up and have conversation. You can, again, if you want to use the comment area to share your website or share your Instagram handle or ways that we can contact you, that's great because it just allows everyone to see who's here. Please be respectful of everyone. EFA is an inclusive and affirming environment. Any sort of hate will not be tolerated. So if that happens, you will be booted. And also we have a land acknowledgement that we're making, being that we're in Midtown Manhattan. So we'd like to honor, acknowledge, and affirm the Lenni Lenape Indigenous community and ancestors for allowing us to hold space together in the greater New York City area. So, and again, I assume most of you have checked this out. Oh my goodness, my thing is so sensitive. But if you have not checked out efa.art, please go ahead and do that. Sorry, I don't know what's happening. Okay, so I just have this, the Freedom is an Act, the exhibition, which I curated, When I was looking and contending with the sort of range of work that the artists were producing, oftentimes it's, you know, when you're curating a show, you want to offer up some kind of vision for the audience as to why these works are sitting together and how to sort of approach the works. And one thing that I noticed amongst all 9 members was the integrity with which all of the members were investigating materials and just the intensity of just kind of like you know, social justice in many cases, and like free exploration of their materials and their ideas and concepts. So John Lewis had recently passed away and he was on my mind. And so one of his salient quotes came to my mind when thinking about this group of 9 artists. But we must accept one central truth and responsibility as participants in a democracy. Freedom is not a state, it is an act. It is not some enchanted garden perched high on a distant plateau where we can finally sit down and rest. Freedom is the continuous action we all must take, and each generation must take its part to create an even more fair and more just society. So I think that that's an appropriate quote for our current state. And certainly, I think it embodies the principles of the artists in the show. So if you go, I think in the chat right now, there's the link to actually go to the exhibition page. If you go to our exhibition page, you can take a virtual tour of the show. There is a viewing room with images, with video documentation, with more details and information about all the artwork in the show. So feel free to take a look at that. And today we have sort of an ambitious, again, program that we're going to be diving into. But here's the sort of general talk schedule with all the artists speaking at different times. And what's interesting about, or one of the reasons that the artists are arranged in this order is because when you come into the exhibition, this is the order in which you encounter the works, or one proposed order in which you encounter the works. So my attempt was to sort of mimic some kind of bodily experience, even though we are quite disembodied on these virtual platforms. So let me just look at this. So right on time. So with that, I'm going to be sort of manning the slideshow, but if, you know, Odette, if you want me to step back or whatever, you let me know. Okay, also, I guess we will copy and paste this and put this in the chat, but these are all the websites where you can find more information about the artists or the artist websites. Okay, go ahead, Odette. Would you like me to share any more, or do you want to just take it away with your slideshow?
I'll take it away with mine, thank you.
Okay, great.
Okay, so hopefully there's an image on screen. All right, thank you. And hello to everyone who's here. I'm going to give a brief overview of my practice, which is mostly photography and performance-based. And then rather than talking about the specifics of the work that I have in the exhibition, I'm actually going to share some work in progress instead. So to start, I'm always doing things to images like this one. This is a photograph that I made. I made it on film. I printed it onto newsprint, and then it's been rubbed with ash that I collected from the wildfires in Australia earlier this year. So for me, a photograph is always a starting point. It's never the end result. I treat it like a material, just as I would paint or clay or metal. My photographs typically start off clean, and then I disrupt their being. And by that, I mean, I use my camera to process the information that's in front of me, but then I elaborate on that. So mine is a practice of elaboration through different kinds of gestural performances. A photograph takes place once, but I really hate onceness. I much prefer encountering the surface of things over and again, like this print here that's been rubbed with wildfire retardant pigment. A photograph for me it's a surface and a rich site of meditation and of memory and of transformation. And at the heart of my practice is labor. I'm a doer maker, and it's different types of doing that allow me to test the dynamics of a print. I don't know how to make photographs without imposing myself onto them in a physical way, but also a tender way. Most of my work focuses on home and autobiography. I grew up on a remote dairy farm, and living on a farm, all of your essential knowledge is held in your hands and stored in your muscles. And my body still remembers and knows these traditions and cycles of work and repair. And so I try to make this visible in my work. I spend a lot of time mining inner landscapes. I use my camera to have a conversation between the present I and the past me. And I like doing that by writing stories on the top of whatever the camera records. So this image here is from a negative that I buried back in 2018 in the soil of my childhood home. And then I dug it up earlier this year and then printed from it. So rather than being a light and quick process, mine tends to be one that's dark and slow. And in this case was, underground for a time. This work is from a series that I did called Thrice Upon a Time, which I made in 2012. Under my direction, I had my parents revisit the farm that they loved and lost owing to bankruptcy. That was about 30 years ago. And so I had them do these monthly visits for an entire year, and to walk and traverse their land. But while they were traversing it, they had on the soles of their shoes negatives that I'd shot at the farm 5 years prior. So the negatives became damaged and abraded through their act of walking, and then Mum would send the negatives to me here in the US to print from. They're a really good example of my practice as a form of therapeutic theatre. I really like corrupting images. I like the idea of the photograph becoming a site of wreckage. I have a hard time understanding pristine works, and I think it's because I like negating the exactness of photography. And I also really like just making verbal pictures where the creases and the marks become part of the narrative. This is from a series of work that I did, performance-based work called Photos of Me Without Me, in which I deliberately scissored myself out of snapshots that I stole from my mum's albums. I wanted to see what the experience would be like of orphaning myself from an original source. I also just really like undoing assumptions about the specialness of photographs as objects. But I also did this project just because I'm curious. I'm curious about photographs as a type of vulnerable space. So to some work in progress, I'm going to focus just on two projects. The first one is called Dairy Character. This is a project about what's known as confirmation assessment. Confirmation assessment is a term that farmers use to describe, rank, rate, and assess the physical strengths and weaknesses of their cattle. It's most often used in dairy farming. It comes in the form of a guidebook that's written exclusively by men. And the book focuses on two things. It focuses on production of milk and reproduction of calves. So this reproduction life cycle also relates to photography, which is partly why I'm interested in it. So because of these themes, the images in these manuals are often very graphic. There's lots of extreme close-ups of udders, teats, vaginas, legs, rumps, anything that pertains to production and reproduction. The text is very sexist. It's belittling to the female body and the worth of woman. It's not dissimilar to the ways in which some men do and have spoken about females. It's not dissimilar to the language used in pornography. And what stood out to me as someone who grew up in a male-dominant farming environment is that it's a language that I know, but it's a language I don't speak. It was often used by male farmers to speak of and for and about women in rural communities like the one that I was a part of. So this project is about growing up rurally with men who loved cows more than they loved their women, but it's also about the animalization of rural women against the sexualization of cows. And so for this project, I'm bringing together archival images from these confirmation assessment manuals, images from the farm, snapshots, collages, and then photographs that I've shot of my daughter enacting my past. So I'm just going to show you some of the work. The images that you're seeing on screen now are all ones that I'm playing with and experimenting with as part of this work. And this project is going to be published as a book in the fall of next year. So the second work in progress that I'm going to talk about is In the Black, in the Red. And this is super new work, so I might trip over how I describe this. Over the past few years, I've been making photographs of unmarked boundaries where farming lands compete with each other. And they're places where land is officially owned by one farmer, but then through some kind of spit and farmer's handshake arrangement, that ownership transfers. And so in April of this year, I started making these little black and white laserjet prints, and then that you see on the left there. And then I was pressing them up against my computer screen to try and draw in pencil the boundaries from Google Maps where these farmers' lands meet. But many of the boundaries are unmarked, and so I would have to guess where they are. And I liked these little paper maps. They were interesting. So I started bending the negatives to match. And of course, the negatives would crack. But I was having trouble seeing these pencil lines. And so I retraced them in red. And that seemingly random act completely transformed this project. So I took all these little maps or patterns that I made on the left and took all of the negatives that I'd bent, and I sent them all to my mum in Australia, and I asked her to sew them back together and to repair them. So she's following these, and there's about 50 of them. She's following these patterns, but she's also making her own decisions. So she's taking ownership of my negatives. She's taking ownership of land that she has a different kind of relationship to now, and certainly different to my father's. You know, her role at the farm was one of looking after children and cooking and sewing. And now she gets to put her mark on land that she no longer owns, and in fact never owned, because rural women, certainly at that time, and is still the case, they never have a legal right to the land because it's usually in the male farmer's name. So there's this pouring outward the complexities that she and I are experiencing inward, but we're using the exterior landscape to inform how we go about reconciling that. The phrase "in the black, in the red," it means making a loss versus making a profit. And my parents used to use this phrase all the time. And the longer we were at the farm, the more they were in the red. And I didn't come up with this title until recently. It was embedded in memory. It was embedded in the work. I just had to spend time looking at the work and putting my hands to it to realize it. So there's the paper pattern at the bottom of screen. And that's my mum's handwork at the top. She's an incredibly gifted sewer. And you can see a little close up of what that looks like. So over the past few months, I'm trying to show you what you would see on my studio wall right now. This is a test print made in the darkroom. It's one of these sewer negatives. The language of farming and the language of land is typically masculine. So I really like that it's mum's handwork and my hands are the primary drivers of this work. Lines also have their own beautiful language, and I've been doing a lot of research into the history of the line through lenses of geography and linguistics and archaeology, just to help inform how I'm going about making these. This is one that I made in the color darkroom. When you make these in the color darkroom, the red thread turns blue. So I'm playing with that at the moment. And then I've got ones where I'm bending the thread, so it's kind of like holding and capturing the land. And then when you do when you reverse a color negative in the color darkroom, I'm able to get the red thread back. and the color back. So that's something else that I've been experimenting with. And then these are little contact prints that are actually at the size of the negative. So I'm always thinking about how to activate surfaces of images that have already been through layers of translation and transformation. I think I'm just resolutely anti-pacifist when it comes to making. I have to be very involved. And I love to think that personal memory can eventually become some kind of historical artifact. So that's it, that's me. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to any questions that folks have. And thank you very much, Natalia, and everyone for inviting me to share just a little of the work that I've been doing.
Thank you so much, Odette. That was wonderful. Okay, so I'm just gonna pick it back up from there, and just so everyone can see, this is actually some of Odette's work installed in the gallery. It's absolutely beautiful. Okay, so now we're going to be listening to Laura Anderson Barbata speak about her work. So Laura, take it away. You can unmute yourself.
Hello, good evening. Thank you, Natalia, and thank you, EFA. I am thrilled to be here and with all of these amazing and fascinating artists, new members. I'm so proud to be a new member myself of EFA. My name is Laura Anderson Barbata. I'm a Mexican artist and currently in Brooklyn right now, home to a number of First Nations people. I pay respect to elders, past, present, and future, starting with the Lenape peoples, including the Manahatin, the Canarsie, the Shinnecock, the Regawank, Merrick, Rockway, Matinecock, Munsi, and the Six Nations, all who have been and are caretakers of Lenape-Hoking. And to the native nations who occupied these lands, whose names have been erased through genocide. I create participatory collaborative interventions that combine performance, procession, protest, dance, music, and wearable sculptures to convey a message. Some of my other interventions, for example, are Intervention Wall Street that, of course, responded to the economic crisis of 2008, Intervention Ocean Blues, and Intervention Ocean Calling that address the environment. Intervention Indigo, you see photos here, from 2015 to 2020 is the work we will be discussing, and it's also what is the evolving work is on view at EFA. Intervention Indigo is a work that combines the earlier ways of expressing my work, bringing interventions to the public space, and collaborating with a number of artists. In this image, we started the intervention at the police precinct in Bushwick with a performance ritual performed and portrayed by Chris Walker, who is in this image on the left, and he is a choreographer and dancer of Jamaican descent who portrayed the rolling calf. And rolling calf is a spirit in this case, in this intervention, portrays both a female spirit and a male spirit. And for the female is the grieving mother who has lost her child due to police brutality. And the male spirit is the restless soul of a young man, a young person whose life was cut short through violence by police brutality. Intervention Indigo uses the color indigo to reflect upon the social meaning of color culturally, historically. It is a pigment utilized all over the world, a natural dye that has a very, very strong connection to our interpretation of the color historically. In Japan, in Mexico, where I'm from, Guatemala, the United States, in Asia, you see in the continent of Africa,
indigo is a very important color. In fact, in Burkina Faso, newborn babies are wrapped with indigo dyed cloths to protect them. It is a color that symbolizes royalty, wisdom, and protection. And for me, it is not a coincidence that police around the world wear this color blue. It resonates with us. It resonates and speaks to us about protection. And so in this work, we remind our viewers of the importance of the role of the color blue and those who wear it, and also bring visibility, for example, in this work, of Afro-descendant communities in this continent. This image right here shows the Diablos de la Costa Chica de Guerrero, Los Diablos de Ometepec. And the Diablos are a community, a dance that is traditional of the Afro-Mexican coast. Many people do not know that Mexico has an Afro community. In fact, Afro-descendant community. In fact, this work we presented in 2020, right before COVID, in February in Mexico City, also bringing a protest and a call to action. And it was performed, and we traversed through the city, starting instead of police precinct like we did in Brooklyn. Here we faced the two main buildings of police security, and like the FBI equivalent of Mexico, and to protest and the violence towards people of color in Mexico, and the invisibility of people of African descent. The Constitution of Mexico was only in 2008 that recognizes the Afro descent as Mexican people and part of the Mexican history. So this was a very important piece for me to bring to Mexico City, where I was born. So right after presenting this, I come back to New York and COVID hits. So immediately it was obvious that the most impacted communities, our QTBIPOC communities, Latinx communities, were being highly impacted in Queens, in the Bronx. We all know this. We all know now. It was at the beginning, it was very clear that this was going to happen. And so we are in the middle of a lockdown, and I felt I needed to respond immediately in some way. And I had indigo fabrics. I had just come back from the intervention in Mexico City, and I began to make masks, to distribute and to give away, and found that I was going from these large protest processions with lots of participants and lots of spectator participation, and who join us along these routes, to these very, with masked costume characters that could be like 15 feet high, to these very intimate small pieces that carried the same message about protecting and serving our communities, and in particular to reaching out to our communities of color to protect. And that it's also a reminder that it is all our responsibility to protect each other. And in this same spirit, I start to reach out, find people who need them. And a beautiful thing starts to happen, that people I don't even know start to give me things as gifts, like in reciprocity. And it really forced me to recognize something that I find that is very important in my work, which is that reciprocity, the importance of recognizing each other's labor, each other's contributions. And that is also a line that I continue through my work and have through my collaborative works, starting with work in the Amazon. And through this, I'm also looking at how can we create in this moment, in this fractured moment that that so many flaws of the system are evident, how can we create parallel economies where we can sustain, support, and give to each other freely without the normal or the dominant systems that have also unfairly treated so many people and continue to do so and continue to exploit, again, people of color. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Laura.
Gracias a ustedes, gracias.
Okay, these are beautiful. And again, this is just so you can see a little bit of what is actually installed in the gallery. So you can see a collection of her masks, and then those videos, one documenting the performance in Bushwick in 2015, and the other one in Ciudad de Mexico in 2020. So those are both in the gallery. So now we're going to speak to Jason, which is fabulous. And Jason, just take it away. Or would you like me to play the video first?
We can wait, we can play it in a moment. I thought I would actually just kind of like tell the story of how this work came about so that it might sort of serve as some kind of insight into the sorts of things that I'm thinking about and the way that I approach stuff. I'm an artist and a lawyer, and I use kind of I guess every sort of job that I have as a kind of also residency maybe or site for kind of performance or interventions as well. That's sort of why I sort of got into art making once my legal career had already begun, and so it was really kind of an effort to seek to kind of expand the use of legal materials outside the very narrow functions that they usually serve to kind of establish the truth of something in a contested forum and that sort of approach. And so I worked as a war crimes prosecutor for many years in The Hague, and I did interventions and performances as part of the court cases that I was working on, as well as using access to the archives to sort of draw out materials that we had that would otherwise not really see the light of day, and try to kind of play around with them, and also play around with the fact that they have this kind of overlapping medium with art. So, you know, the same tools we use to prove facts in courtrooms with either words or photographs or videos, even drawings sometimes, also are kind of key ways of communicating in the art world. And so I'm often trying to kind of play with that overlap and see, you know, where we look for objectivity in some places and subjectivity in others. But that doesn't mean, even though a lot of my work addresses things like genocide, it doesn't mean that it, you know, also can't also have some sort of humoristic element. And so I also, and I think the work that I have put into this new members exhibition is a little bit lighter, and I felt I sort of almost felt a duty to do that, given the kind of otherwise kind of constant drumbeat of depressing kind of things to think about, and life experiences that we're all sort of encountering in many different ways this year. And so I have sort of, I started by this, when, you know, signing up as a new member, signing the papers and seeing this this clause in the rules of the EFA that said that the rules are subject to amendment with the discretion of the institution, and that the way that they can become officially implemented is as simple as just posting the new rules in public places around the building. And I thought, yes, this is a good trigger. You know, this is a good way to get in there and see if we can kind of engage with the institution itself, because I wanted to do a kind of either site specific or institution specific thing. And so I started to think about kind of ways that the rules could be kind of altered or amended for this temporary period of the exhibition time, kind of in a way that would also address the the specific time that we're living in, and also how strange things are in a place like the EFA compared to what they normally would be like. And so that was sort of the jumping off point. Natalia, in her curatorial brilliance, in our first sort of conversation, was doing what I think every awesome curator should do by asking questions and sort of seeing, where the sort of new work could be pushed in different directions. And she was asking kind of, you've been working in different mediums, over the course of the past few years. Are there like opportunities to kind of expand the work beyond rulemaking and like use other ways to kind of either intervene in the space or otherwise? And I started to sort of cycle through different kind of approaches, and I do a lot of video as well, and sometimes it takes the form of kind of video collage and that sort of thing. And I was thinking, if you're doing rulemaking on a very sort of local level, like these EFA rules, they apply to a very specific group of people, maybe 100 people, in the world are kind of addressed by these new rules. And I was thinking, what's the sort of bookend to that on the opposite end? And that could be something like the U.S. Senate. And so I sort of took that as a kind of jumping off point, and they sort of the two kind of elements kind of started to grow together, so that as I was making new rules to propose to be implemented in the EFA that would relate to, to the COVID context, but also to our context as artists, I was also thinking how that might apply to the Senate, to the very polarized kind of discourse that we have going on in politics right now, especially the way that we're talking about things like vaccines and, what information can we trust? What is the pharmaceutical industry doing? And then it sort of all came together, this idea. I'd been thinking about pharmaceutical advertisements in the United States, which are it's like a unique thing. You don't find it in other countries very easily, where there are these advertisements that are almost entirely made up of side effects. The sort of the images are these kind of people like happily romping through fields, and at the same playing with their children and that kind of thing. But the majority of the kind of audio is about what's vomiting and sudden death that could happen if you take this medicine. So I was thinking this is going to be a kind of a sort of way to make a collage. So what you see on the screen is the way the work is installed in the exhibition. So you have the new rules that are kind of at the top, and then you have this video, which is essentially a collage of found images related to the Senate and the U.S. Capitol, and then found audio that's entirely from pharmaceutical advertisements. We could go to another slide, because I think there's some. This sort of shows what some of these rules are. So the first one relates to social interactions, and it suggests that a lot of this is about kind of the suggestions of like conversation topics when you bump into someone in a socially distanced context in the EFA. So some of them are like you can speculate on when the White House will announce that a COVID-19 vaccine has been developed, and then you can speculate on when the pharmaceutical industry will actually create a COVID-19 vaccine, and then a reminder of when election day is. Same with like email drafting. There's kind of like an instruction to do a performance related to email drafting that involves drafting all of these alternate phrases and then ultimately deleting them. And I was thinking a lot about kind of Yoko Ono's Grapefruit, and the idea of doing a sort of a set of instructions that ultimately results in nothing, but still a process that's related to this time. You can go to the next one. And here, I was also thinking about our kind of unique situation as artists in this institution, and you have a rule that says when interacting with curators and other art professionals inside the studio building, whether in person or via video conference, etc., members and sharers are encouraged to express admiration for their work, regardless of whether the expressed admiration is genuine. If a member or share is unfamiliar with a given curator, gallerist, or art writer's work, the member or share is encouraged to express a vague familiarity with their work nonetheless in order to minimize awkwardness and maintain the EFA's positive reputation during these challenging times. So, you know, also again, thinking about like kind of what a lot of us probably do sometimes. I know that I do that all the time because I don't know anything. But if you know, and then again, finally, the reminder about Election Day. So if we go to the next slide, yeah. So we can play this video. It's pretty brief, and you'll sort of see what this collage looks like if it works.
I have it open here.
Change is in the air. You can do something different because the landscape of options has changed. We spoke up and it made all the difference. You stop losing and start reversing. It's good to have choices, but it feels like I need some more help. The problem isn't likely to go away on its own. Why aren't artificial tears enough for me?
You just shouldn't have to feel this way.
He started believing things that weren't true. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't say a word.
Here's a question. Who wouldn't want a chance to significantly reduce hallucinations and delusions? Who wouldn't want a chance to stay alive and out of the hospital?
Be more confident, fall asleep, and stay asleep.
Live longer. If things come make intercourse more comfortable.
Better.
Be ready.
Relieve my pain.
Stay focused.
Sleep in.
Better.
Increase tear production.
Very next to me in plain sight. What stories they tell, but for my ears only. The plots they unfold, but only in my mind.
Over 50% of people will experience hallucinations or delusions, so it's time we do something about it.
Live longer. Know more. Know more about what's wrong.
Enhance memories and thoughts in some people. Make more of my own tears. Protect yourself.
So that one runs on a loop. And actually, it was interesting. I started off thinking I wanted to use all the side effects, but actually I ended up using the little snippets that were more aspirational because the sort of, you know, if you just put Mitch McConnell with a audio of vomiting, it's a little bit too on the nose. So as I was sort of working through it, it was actually more, I thought it was more interesting to play with the kind of ambiguous aspirational tones of these. But anyway, that's kind of how that work came about, and that's the sort of way that I'm thinking about these things. So very happy to be here, very humbled to be here with this amazing group, and can't wait to spend more time with everyone in person when that becomes easier to do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jason. I just want to also acknowledge the fact that the space in which the exhibition is held is an active workspace. And so the acknowledgement of like sort of the work environment, labor, what's happening around us, and this sort of like echoing of like a sort of like mini organization, like a nonprofit with a sort of national organization, like a government system. I think these kind of nice echoing moments that happen through the work. So to remind us what's happening at all times. So thank you so much, Jason. So now we're going to hear from Anina Major.
Hi, everyone, and hello. It's good to see everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to share a little bit of my work. I'm going to focus today on the piece that is in the exhibition. But to tell you a little bit about myself, my name's Anina. I am from the Bahamas, and my work primarily investigates my personal relationship between a particular place and self. And it's all in efforts to cultivate moments of reflection and a sense of belonging. This often means that my work draws from anthropological research and oral histories and try to challenge post-colonial ideology and advocate for critical dialogue around developing cultural identities. So you can do the next slide. My motivation behind this was the decision that I personally made and voluntarily made to establish a home contrary to where I was born and raised, which is not very common where I'm from. So I often feel like I am in a continuous state of negotiation. So I want to think about what does it mean every time I'm in a new location and how that influenced my own understanding of self. You can go to the next slide. To do this, I often utilize the vernacular of craft, mainly because this is something I am most familiar with my upbringing. My grandmother engaged in craft as a way of sustaining her family financially, and I have adopted that as a language artistically for communicating themes that I am interested in. And that can range anywhere from, you know, agency as a woman of color, and climate issues, whatever I'm thinking about. So I primarily think about this language that I'm developing. And that means my practice often exists at an intersection of nostalgia. There's some memory in there. There are notions of identity, and at times can evoke a sense of commerce. Sometimes there's like a tangent of where commerce comes into play because it's so closely related to identity where I'm from. I often take the form of any kind of medium, mostly sculpture, ceramic sculpture. In this case, it was an installation. And it often references tropical ecologies as well as historical and contemporary ethnography. The work seeks to unpack emotional complexities that I think are inherited to a transcultural dialogue. And they really surface when you're mapping out the migration of traditions versus foreign influences. So I'm constantly in a state of liminality, it seems like, and this helps me to kind of develop a deeper sense of belonging. And also, I think, leaves the work open for others to enter and relate to their own meanings. So next slide. I think this is my last slide, right?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
So with this piece in the show, it's titled Majestic Harmony, and I'm bringing together two distinct bodies of work, this, what I call the Spike series and the Woven series. The palms appear almost as if they're floating within the space as opposed to hanging, and immediately are recognizable as these domestic symbols. Their gentle sway suggests a kind of intangible union between the two. And the ceramic vessels maintain a placid, ever-shifting kind of composition and exude to this kind of ethereal weightlessness, which is uncommon to ceramics, because these are actually quite heavy. Though they're floating, they're very much of the earth. To me, the release from the ground symbolizes a kind of ascension and elevation into their origins. And they act as surrogates as well of the actual earth, and holding life within them is a way of cultivating that. So you can find additional images of my work on my website. It's my name, aninamajor.com, and you can also follow me on Instagram under the handle Anina Major. But to conclude my kind of presentation, I wanted to show a video of the actual piece because I think it's much better interpreted in person. So I will share my screen.
Okay.
And just play this video. I won't speak while it's playing. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Because I also think that silence leads to this contemplative mode. So I'm gonna play.
Thank you, Anina. I also just want to mention that what's amazing about the work is that it's just that, yeah, we have the windows open, and as the breeze comes in, it does catch the palms and alters them and moves it. So it's like you come across the work and it looks a particular way, and then you come back later and it's shifted. And so that kind of mobility is really nice. And also, though, I do have to say, like, this work kind of was sparked by a little bit of just like a neighborhoodly encounter with some plants, and the signage being questionable, and sort of like sparking this inspiration kind of from the point of, I don't know if you wanted to share.
Yeah, I mean, the work it kind of evolved. I'm constantly sifting through these ideas of what does tropicality mean, and the ways in which often when we use this definition, it disenfranchise a group of individuals. And before installing this piece, just on my regular errands, I came across a sign at one of the hardware stores for plants that was just kind of like, bring the tropical into your home decor for winter, or can you hear the tropical or something? And I was like, what does that even mean? And then I started to research this particular plant, which I have used in other installations. And I learned that it actually is a plant that has been used so many times that its origin almost is irrelevant in defining it. It basically every decor imaginable. And so there's something to be said about that assimilation and the role that that plays, and even my own personal understanding of how these particular plants exist. So there's a lot of symmetry in this piece that I think lent itself well to this space. And I think it also came out of just responding to the space. I'm new to this space, and one of the ways that I tend to respond to being in a new space is actually figuring out how my work or how I exist in that space. And this was an example of doing so. So yes, thank you for that opportunity. And I am excited to meet all of you once we get past whatever is going on right now.
Thank you so much, Anina. And I just want to say it was such a pleasure to have this work installed. It was like, really talk about elevating my spirits. It was a big one. Okay. And now we're going to hear from Katya. Katya has and is involved in so many aspects actually in the building. So it's quite exciting to hear from Katya. Katya, go ahead.
All right. Thank you so much, Natalia. Great to see everyone. I've been running around for the last.
You might appear multiple times.
For the last 2 months, I guess, since I moved in. So I'm an artist and curator. I work in many different mediums, including sculpture, installation, video performance, and curatorial practice. So this work is called Postcards from America. It was developed during the lockdown. Basically, I lost access to my former studio, and I started just digitally painting. I paint a lot, always on different surfaces, but never really fully digitally. So I decided to just explore that area. And it's basically collages of vintage Disneyland, I would say, snapshots that I've been sourcing on the internet, and just painting every day over them, collaging them together, etc. So the installation is just one postcard that I selected from this series and printed on different surfaces. I wanted to see what happens when you kind of go from fully digital screen-based work back to analog, I guess. And it's printed on the photo wallpaper, sticky wallpaper, and fabrics, different fabrics, and then vinyl. So I wanted to see what happens to the color, what happens to different surfaces. And that's the installation, the wall-based installation, repetitive. So it's kind of, I'm interested in repetition, and the project is ongoing. It's a mixed media project that I've been sort of thinking about how to go from fully digital to more of a physical. So this is the first iteration between those kind of two mediums, I guess. And I am going to do a performance this Friday as part of the Open Studios. It will be kind of in front of this installation, but it is on Zoom, and I'll be using some digital tricks. So it's between digital and physical. And it is kind of moving the work forward into more of a sci-fi situation. So it's called Postcards from America, Guests from the Future. Because in September, I did a digital online residency with a software startup called Playform. It's really, you can just make a free account and play with it. It's an AI software that actually produces artwork. So you feed many images, minimum 30 images of anything, including your work, anything from the internet, etc. And you can mash things up, you can explore. So I've been feeding it my postcard images and mashing them up with my drawings and many my Disneyland pictures. And why Disneyland? I'm working on a larger scale project about the fall of the American Empire, which will be exhibited next year in a large scale installation. Hopefully it goes on. It's been postponed from this year to next year. And so I've been thinking about what that means. And that project is called Fantasyland, which is based on Disneyland, part of Disneyland, and what America, to me, I'm an immigrant here, kind of represents sometimes as a made up place, an imaginary place that I wanted to be in my whole life. So my work kind of talks about this made up place and displacement and sort of feeling always out of place and kind of finding humor and absurdity in those in-between places. So that's the performance. Will be exploring all of the above. And I'm going to be using images that I fed to the AI. So it's images that I've made through the residency, through the software. So it's more of a digitally enhanced, really bizarre images that I really love. They're kind of nightmarish because they go through a big process of training this machine. And I created a character because I do a lot of performance and video and I create characters. And I thought, what an opportunity to create a sci-fi AI assistant. So her name is Aisa. She comes from the future. And I have actually a portrait of her. It's my face tuned. It's very bizarre. So I can share my screen and show a little bit of that. So I'll be using this and some other, and these are the postcard images that I've been producing daily. It's a lot of fun playing online in Photoshop, and I use many different painting programs. I like to mix it up. I like to draw digitally. I realized it's a lot of fun. And now I'm printing them more and more on canvas and just seeing if I want to paint back into them physically, etc. So the AI images come from all of these and many other. I've made thousands of images now with the AI. So I'm going to share my screen, show a little bit of what I'll be showing in performance and kind of exploring, it's very experimental, exploring live for Zoom, on Zoom, gesture identity, all these issues that I've been thinking about, also like this idea of AI and science fiction in the future. And I also fed her my childhood photos from Soviet Union, was born in Ukraine, behind the Iron Curtain. So it's kind of like a mixture of nostalgia and the future. So let me share my screen. Let's see. Okay. So this is the, so this is the performance, and these are the AI images. So you can see the difference. They've gone through something different, a little bit. And I fed the machine a lot of my drawings. And this is my AI assistant, face-tuned myself. So she's kind of from Soviet Union into the future. It's actually Guest from the Future is based on a Soviet 1980s sci-fi film I grew up with. So I rewatched it and decided to kind of create this character. And these are some of the images that I created, which will be also a solo exhibition opening next week on Artsy as a fully digital online exhibition. And you can see some of the sort of the characters from Disneyland and sort of mashed up with my paintings. So that's my Mickey Mouse from the future. And that's it. So join me on Friday. I think I'll stop share the screen. It's 6 to 8, and then there'll be Q&A. So it's not the full hour, 2 hour performance. There's a Q&A there as well after the performance. And also on join Saturday, we have the closing of the show that I curated at EFA Project Space called the Immigrant Artists Biennial, Here Together, which is a big project that was supposed to open in March. So it's open in September, it's closing, and we have a virtual closing event on Saturday. So those are my 2 lives.
Thank you so much, Katya. Absolutely incredible. The Immigrant Artist Biennial is just a beautiful, immersive show. So again, I hope everybody can come and see all the shows. Okay, and actually it was perfect. I just wanted to maybe quickly go back. And again, it's a little difficult to understand the space, but it's sort of like as we're turning the corner, we see Whitney's work right here. And it was actually the first work I was able to install in the show. So it has a very meaningful place for me because during the pandemic, during the shutdown, I hadn't seen artwork in person for months. And so to see Whitney's just textural, amazing piece, I had like a very strong experience with hanging this work and getting to see it in person. So thank you so much for that, Whitney. Go ahead, take it away.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here, and I just want to echo what everyone said about feeling like humbled to be in the crowd. And just excited also about the show. I thought it looked great. So this piece is just, it's called Hidden. And I really liked the title of the show and why you chose it as well, because I think freedom is an act. I think a lot sort of, when I make things, it does sort of feel like a bodily protest or sort of an excavation of thoughts that are troubling to me. And so it does feel very much like I'm exercising my freedom when I make the work that I make. I'm just gonna do a screen share though, real quick.
Great. I'm gonna stop my screen here.
Okay. See here. Okay. Can you see everyone see everything? Okay. Yeah, so I think my work comes from a very personal place that I think, and I often think about sort of how my life is impacted both by the things I surround myself with, but also how those things in turn impact my life, and also how being born into a certain, almost like a sort of deconstructing one's privilege and place in the world. So for instance, like this particular piece, I was inspired by Aunt Annie's frozen food container. And I started to think about like both why I was eating the frozen food, being like exhausted. And then I started thinking about, but really I was eating like a really high-end frozen food, and how others, don't always have that luxury. And then I was thinking about myself as the frozen food and how like my body becoming frozen food. And then also why like the labor, the beehive kind of construction around it. I was also thinking about my lived experience, just how often and how much your life you're working, and that because you're working so much, you're eating the frozen food to begin with. So it becomes a sort of like circular, but very kind of investigation, or a very deep investigation to the things, personal moments within my life. So like, here's another example of, oh, that one won't link. Like this one, the dish rack, both thinking about this, a place of where like plates are put, but also the act of washing each plate. And then also thinking about like oneself as a plate amongst other plates. And then sort of this finding of oneself. And so when I think about like the actual making of my work, I think about it in a way that whether or not, like with the piece in the show, whether it's wrapping of string or digging or piling, and actually the piece in the show, for instance, just to explain more, there's actually socks with things filled in the socks, and then the socks are wrapped, and then the clay is layered on top. And then I dug out the clay in them. So it's a very laborious process, and I spend a lot of time with my work, and it becomes, they become sort of kind of a marker of a place in my life, and the thoughts that I'm thinking. But then I also try very hard to, in a way, substantiate the way in which that thought might feel, as in a wrapping or a pounding. And I feel like a lot of my work is also, I try to think of like, in that vein, the same sort of thing of like the verbs involved with the things that you're doing. So these shapes actually were laser cut from sponges that I was squeezing. And so I was thinking of this like feeling squeezed, and then the sponge, and then the white came from like this sort of anxiety of like cleaning, how one might clean when they're feeling anxious, and also like a sort of hygiene, so the hairbrush. So I also think of like, sort of the sludge filled sponge as being like also very much a part of someone's life, whether or not they want to admit it or not. How often you touch it, how often it cleans up the food you eat, or the remnants, or a spill, or something embarrassing that you don't want someone to see, or something. Yeah, so that's basically where the inspiration for my work comes from. And then I would say my materials are really far ranging. I've used, there's giant bouncy balls and pacifiers. I've put my shoes, my studio shoes are in one of these pieces. I've used lollipop sticks, rock, clay, wool, but also I really like, so I often take a work that I'm not 100% happy about, and I will kind of continue to use that work, whether it's like chopping it up and repurposing it for another thing. Because I also like the idea that my work is sort of like growing, like quite literally, like one work can be inside of another work and then creating a different work. And I feel very strong, like I don't want any of my work to ever feel precious, because there's something even though you could say like life is precious, there's something about a lived experience that feels like you go through so much that for it to be precious feels somehow I can't, like, if I can't take it with me and carry it and it might bang around and drag, then it's somehow not going to fully embody parts of my lived experience too. So that part is something I think about. Yeah, what
I
else?
also just think about like the physicality of your work. I think it's a little difficult to grasp, again, in this virtual experience of your work, but that it is quite dimensional, and it also, the scale is, one of the hidden piece that's in the show is actually one of your smaller works, and I think the majority of your works are actually quite large. So I think that that's just something to keep in mind when looking at these pieces too. And I like how you do include your shoes in some of the installation shots, so you can kind of get a sense of that scale.
Yeah, so a lot of my pieces, like this piece, you know, it's maybe 5 feet by 5 feet, but it's also 2 feet deep.
Right.
So yeah, and also this piece is easily 200 pounds. So it's something I always, I like working on the floor because I feel close to it and I can move around it from every direction. And there's a sort of intimate relationship between the thing I'm making. And I stand on ladders to look at it, which is also kind of funny. And it can get kind of funny to try and see it. But what happens is then after some time, I guess I get really into it and I don't realize, like, wow, shoot, this is 200 pounds. So but there's something like the labor of moving it, and also this idea that this thing that I've created could potentially crush me. I think there's something alluring about that there's something that I feel that I need to be like carrying this, not a burden, but the heavy weight of it or something is something, it's very inconvenient. And I think there's something like beautiful about the inconvenience.
Yeah, I would have to, I think that there is something there. I feel like it's like a level of care, or a little level of like, it just, it interferes, and therefore you have to contend with it,
Yeah.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Whitney.
Yeah.
That was wonderful. Just stop, if you could stop sharing, perfect. Okay, so we're moving right along. We have Susan Silas. This is another work that maybe is a little deceptive. It looks like it's maybe a smaller piece, but it's huge, 6 feet tall.
So Natalia, I'm actually going to, after you show the pictures just of the installation, I'm going to screen share.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to quickly go through what I have here. So
I'll stop you after the installation because I'll repeat some of that. Yeah, I would stop right there, and I'll take over.
Great.
Let's see if it'll do. What's happening here? Okay. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so I just want to say hello to everybody and say how pleased I am to be a new member at EFA, and I love my space, and I hope at some point we'll have more normal circulation in the building where we can all visit each other. So my work essentially for at least the last 20 years has pretty consistently been an examination of embodiment and what it is to kind of live in a body. And that includes work that I made about the Holocaust, in which I retraced the steps of a women's march, and in which there are actually no images of me, just images of my POV. It includes work that I've made of found birds that were dead and decaying, and in which I think the bird ended up being an avatar for the kinds of images I saw as a kid of rotting corpses in the concentration camps. They ended up kind of being stand-ins for those bodies. And so the work has been about the fragility of sentient being, but now more, I think it's also just about embodiment generally. And that embodiment has now kind of come face to face with much newer technologies, including the idea of whole brain emulation, which totally fascinates me, even though I don't totally believe in it, which is the idea that we can get rid of our body and just upload our brain to a computer and have done with it and be immortal. So at the same time, the work, I started out as a fairly traditional photographer, using black and white film, being in the darkroom, and that work has traditionally been talked about as having an indexical aspect, in that it refers to a moment in time when the image is made, in the real world, and also that it has iconic value, which is that it resembles, the image you make resembles the thing you were looking at, the camera was looking at. But now we have a situation in which we can create a 3D image, right? Or create myself in the round, put that into a computer as an object, and it'll still have some of those old qualities. It still has the indexical quality of me having been photographed in real space somewhere before all that happened, or my face having been scanned in a real space. And it still has an iconic value, e.g. it still looks like me when the final product arrives. However, it's now becomes a data set, essentially, right? It becomes raw data, and I can now output that data in a variety of different forms that weren't available before. So one of the first things I did along these lines was to stand inside of a photogrammetry rig, have a 3D object file made of me posing as Venus, and creating a sculpture that was 24 inches high, that's made of marble, that was CNC machined and polished by hand. So this has a weirdly photographic quality in a certain way, and yet it's a 3D sculpture, right? But the image that's in the show is not a portrait of this sculpture, but it is a portrait derived from the same file that created this, except that it looks like this, which is that I shot a portrait of that very same file, right, in a 3D space, and this is what the result is, right? So both of these images, the flat photograph and the sculpture, basically are the result of the exact same, quote, photo session and the same file. Then after that, right, I also realized that, and this is based on the scan, that I could make not just a photograph, which is this, right? Photographic portrait of this avatar that I had created of myself. But I could also make, I'm just going to show you a tiny bit of this because it's online and you can see it. I could also animate this. So yet again, there's another way to output this information that is again about one's contemporary understanding of the self, and also about our relationship to representation. So I'm just going to do a tiny bit of this so you can see what this is like.
Who would mourn her when she was gone? More importantly, who would preserve her life's work?
She was worried about her legacy. She wanted to be famous. Isn't that what all artists wanted? It was their ticket to immortality for centuries. When she realized that the end was getting closer.
So that's something you can it's not very long, it's about 4 minutes long. You can easily watch that on my site if you like. So the avatar piece lives as a photographic portrait. It lives as this motion capture video, and it is currently at a foundry being turned into a larger than life sculpture, which will be done in white bronze, so it'll look silver. So on the right, you're looking at the CNC model, and on the left, you're looking at the wax, and this will eventually be, in the next 2 weeks, poured as a bronze and become a larger than life sculpture. And I have a side view of this as well. So basically what's happening is this incredible ability due to new technology to kind of reconfigure oneself over and over again in all these different, permutations is kind of what's happening. One other thing that I did also, which is also allowed by new technology, is that I created a sculpture that's basically a marriage of my husband and I, in which from the groin down, the sculpture is him, and from the groin up, it's me. And this sculpture is actually based on a traditional Roman antiquity, which is now called the Nazanin hermaphrodite. It was a sculpture of Narcissus. And at some point in its history, somebody intervened and started to carve breasts into the sculpture. And so it's now it became known after that as the Nazanin hermaphrodite, and it's at the Louvre. And so the two of us posed like that, and then we were essentially married together. This is a marble also. It's 30 inches tall. So from, I don't know if you can see my little cursor, but from here down, it's my husband, also shrunk a bit to fit to me because he's bigger than I am. And the rest is me. And this sculpture is titled Ode to Echo and Narcissus. And again, I was able to create photographic images from this. So this would be a photograph that's a result also of the same input of us married together. And as is this one. Then sort of along those lines and thinking about the theme of uploading one's brain to a computer, I married us together in a slightly different way. This time bisecting us like this. And so his face is on the right and me here on the left. And I intend to also do a motion capture with this that's going to kind of play with the idea of what happens when hypothetically, speculatively, the two of us are uploaded into the same container. And it's just going to be kind of conversation about what that feels like, what my expectations were, what gets realized and what doesn't. This is an image of it from the back. And here's an image of a tiny model that, so here you can see on the right is his face, on the left me, and then you can see us from either side kind of realized the more masculine side and, oops, the more femme side. What else would I like to show you? And then the other recent work along these lines is me having created a sculpture where my face now kind of coexists with Bernini's Medusa. So the snakes are really very close to what the Bernini head looks like. And the idea is to cast this and do this in marble, but I was meant to go to Italy in April, and that has been indefinitely postponed. And this also generated photos. Here you can see, I'll show you a couple of them. And so this mirroring is also going to take place in a motion capture video that's going to talk about the Medusa, roughly 4 minutes long.
Really cool.
And then I can show you just lastly, so this is all of this stuff, again, is kind of involved in thinking about what our relationship to representation right now, our relationship to the self, and our relationship to embodiment. And then the last thing was that I was listening to a physicist talking, and one of the things that he said in this talk was, there is no time without heat. And that got me pretty excited. And I started to play with a thermal camera as a consequence of that. And I have a series of works already existing called Love in the Ruins, Sex Over 50, which have been photographs, traditional photographs of me and my husband, and that are very high resolution. This is incredibly low resolution, but this is what the camera does. This kind of low res heat camera. So it basically sees heat. And it's used by plumbers and electricians and stuff. It's not a very sophisticated camera. It also will shoot video. And I did do one video, which I'll play just a teeny bit for you, and then we can kind of finish up here. So this is this machine, this thing recording me at 3 different settings, which is why you have 3 different kind of palettes here. And one of the fun things that happened that I didn't anticipate is that this happens to be being done on a carpet, like a kind of nice wool rug. Mm. And you'll notice eventually that the rug is absorbing the heat from my body, so that as I'm moving around, you start to see these heat stains that are the rug absorbing the heat of where I've been sitting. And that was kind of an unanticipated plus. Like here where I start to roll over, you'll start to see that the rug is maintaining that body heat. So obviously the hotter something is, the brighter it gets. And this also was something that got made during the lockdown and feels very much about just the vulnerability of the body at a point where everybody's under threat, essentially. And that, of course, if there's no heat in your body, you're dead. That's it. So there you go. Anyway, it's a pleasure showing you some things. Anybody wants to contact me at any point and do a sort of one-on-one, I'm happy to entertain that. And I think probably my time is up. So on to the next person.
Thank you, Susan. I mean, this is beautiful. It's beautiful imagery. I mean, it's really, really captivating.
I have to quit this.
Stop sharing your screen.
Okay,
yeah, okay, wonderful. Okay, so we're still onwards. We've got Nazanin, so excited, and Alan still to come. Okay, so Nazanin, you're comfortable with me just screen sharing?
Yeah, I think screen share, and then I may want to show like a minute of a video, which I'm gonna.
Great, we can do that.
So we're gonna start with the first one. So hi everyone, my name is Nazanin. Just like everybody else, very, very much excited to be part of EFA. I've been involved with EFA in so many different ways in the past couple of years that it just feels so great to finally be, a member. So I come from a painting background, but my practice has been involved in so many different mediums lately. I do a lot of works on paper. I take photographs. I deal with a lot of alternative processes, although I'm not a photographer. And I make a lot of non-traditional prints, as in printmaking. They often begin with images of my personal and family archives overlaid with landscapes, found imagery, and lo-fi graphics. And what you can see in this image is I like to recreate, because I work with a lot of personal archives and found imagery, I'd like to make broken narratives or create my own narratives out of things that you see. So what I try to do, and I know like these days, especially in the contemporary art, there's a very interesting tendency towards working with archives, and I try to add my own agency to it and not treat it as clinically as you may see in many, other approaches. Having said that, I may want to show you a small, short piece of one of my videos, and then I want to talk about it a little later. Is that okay, Natalia?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so let me see. How do I do screen share? Okay, there we go. There we go. Okay. And can you see it?
Mm-hmm. You just want to maximize on your video, just maximize your full scale.
Okay. Okay.
The little square on Pearl, like look on the video, the lower, yeah, there we go. Perfect.
All right. So this is a stop motion film that I made. It's only 20 minutes. I'm not going to play all of it. I just want you guys to see like maybe a minute and a half of it, so that, you have an understanding of what my recent works are about. Okay, I'm just gonna pause here because I don't wanna, you can definitely, I'm gonna share the link to the video, and you can watch the whole thing on my website if you like. So these two short films that I've made so far, and there's another one, they're based on Super 8 films that my father took in the late 70s and early 80s in pre-revolutionary Iran. And I found them a couple of years ago in our basement, and I was like really infatuated with them. Even before that, my work always dealt with, found imagery or snapshots that I used to take. But as I found these, it got me thinking about ideas of loss and longing, and, trying to make transient moments with, handmade cinema. Each film is consisted of like more than 500, hand painted image. It's a pretty much labor-intensive process. It's very primitive. I don't use any special software, or I'm not really great at, like, you know, I'm not a filmmaker. So what I did was I digitized those Super 8s, and then I print out these still frames and I paint on each and every single frame. As I was thinking about the 80s, and 80s for me personally, for us Iranians, was a very odd decade because we were pretty much isolated. It was right after the revolution. We had an 8-year war with Iraq. You know, it was an entirely surreal experience. And as I was thinking about my personal, you know, experience of having lived with the effects of the 80s, I started getting infatuated with early computer games and very simple, pixelated, barbaric imagery that you would see in the very first computer games that they came out in the 80s, and they're the very first shooting games, kind of. So in both Pearl that you watched, as in Sound of Water, Pearl, and the other one, Elite 1984, which is named after a video game called Elite, and it was released in 1984. You see that I have used these computer graphic imagery, and I start playing with them. And there are also elements of, you know, mountains, stormy seas. I feel a lot that my work has constantly been about the fragile states of being and ideas of home that actually never materialize. Natalia, I think you can go to the next. Yeah, so in tandem with these films, I create works on paper. They're not necessarily shots of these films, but they're all kind of connected to each other. And what I did in our group exhibition at EFA was I try to expand on the wall and somehow question the objects of paintings or work on paper itself. But I really like the idea that a viewer can come in, watch the film, and experience this kind of a larger installation. It's pretty new to me. I had never done anything like that before, but I'm very excited about how things are going. And in addition to that, I also make artist books from time to time. And as I said, I'm not a photographer, but I really like playing with alternative processes. So these photographs, I took these photographs in a residency that I went last year at Salt and Still Foundation in Ithaca, upstate New York. I got a Diana toy camera from the 1960s, which is infamous for, you know, its light leaks and blurry images. And I started, you know, playing with those images, and I made this kind of a, you know, accordion artist book. So what you do is it's nested in a box, it's floating, and it's an accordion book, so it kind of comes out. I made everything. I made the box myself. I glued, technically as simple as that, all the photographs together. And on the top and the bottom, you see images of Caspian Sea, which is where I kind of grew up around. It's a very large lake in the northern part of Iran. And as you open it, you see these images of, you know, upstate New York. So for me, this relationship, it was very important to me that all these narratives that I try to tell through different registers, you know, personal, communal, or also somehow understood in different landscapes, like an American landscape and an Iranian landscape, as well. As I feel like home in a technical way doesn't really, it has a different definition for us, I guess, new immigrants than it has for some other people. And I guess that's it.
Thank you so much, Nazanin. This is amazing. And I love the artist books, and I love the sort of range of things that you've been working on, like from paper to the stop motion to the artist books. It's been exciting to see your work change and transform. It's very cool. So thank you, Nazanin. And last but not least, we have Alan. And I'm just showing you also, again, as you're progressing in this room, you have Susan Silas's work on the wall that you can't see. And then you have Nazanin's work and Alan's work in this sort of like large room, and you can kind of see them together in the same space. So it's really nice. And here is the work. Go ahead, Alan.
Hi, I'm Alan. So hi from Phoenix, Arizona, or Scottsdale, Arizona. I've been traveling around and collecting materials and things for my next residency, which is the Potato Farm Project, which is an EFA North Fork residency. And all of this started because I grew up near a phosphate mine, and it got me thinking about speculative futures and environmentalism. So I started painting a lot of things like environmental paintings and things. And it got me thinking, like, why am I painting something? Why am I making a facsimile of it, you know? So then I decided to start using the actual materials themselves. So a lot of these clays and soils and things that I use are from washes and things around environmentally damaged areas. So like the one in front of you in the show is a 15-foot tapestry work, which is on canvas, and it's made of clay and soils and iron oxides that are from Florida, near a phosphate mine. Although I didn't collect this specifically from a phosphate mine because there's environmental impacts and health impacts from clays and soils from those areas. And you can roll the slideshow.
There we go.
Yeah, so these are some close-up images of it. A lot of these marks are made almost automatically. So I don't actually go out and like get like a knife or something and like mark it. It's made by drying it very slowly and having it in my studio for about a week or so with a lot of other works, and they kind of make like create these marks automatically. So you see, like, there's multiple layers. So I do multiple layers because it's a lot like stratigraphy, which is the natural layers of clays and soils and the Earth's crust. So I do multiple layers of different clays and soils from around the country. So that's when you get like the dark areas that are beneath or the light areas above, and you get this kind of beautiful contrast. You can move on to the next slide.
I don't have any more.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Some of my other work is.
Oh, do you want me to put your website up or bring up your website?
I guess that would work too. I can.
Or actually, I'm sorry. No, you know what? I do have your, sorry. I have this slideshow. You want to see this slideshow?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, great.
That would be okay.
I was getting lost.
So a lot of these are made from different types of clays and soils. A lot of the clays and soils are collected from New York, Florida, and recently in the Midwest and in the West. These are actually made from, I think it's a Carolina ball clay. There is iron oxide, like 3 different types of iron oxides that are collected, and it's on hemp. So these tapestry works, I decided to go along with things that aren't quite as rigid, you know, and straightforward, because I wanted something, I'm trying to move a little bit more into installation work and less into painting, like straight painting. This one is actually on found wood. It's a iron oxide that's actually been dripped onto wood and clay for I think about a week. So it'll take a long time to actually run down the wood, but it kind of, it's like erosion, you know, it's eroded away off of this wood. So I use a lot of natural forces to make my work. We can.
The next one.
Yeah. So this one is actually on panel. It's different from some of the others because some of the others are actually made on canvas. This one's on panel. It's made from iron oxide and clay. And it's not very big. I think it's 18 by 24, so it's pretty small. And this is another shot of the large one in the show at EFA. It's 15 feet long, and I think it's 5 feet wide.
Right, but this is nice to give a sort of sense of scale because it's a really large immersive piece.
Yeah, and that's actually me walking beside it, where you can actually see, I'm 6 foot high, so you can actually see how big this work is. And this is actually some of my experimental photography and experimental photo techniques. So this is a lithograph. It's a 4-color lithograph for the plate, the actual lithographic plate. The 4-color plates are actually made of paper. So they're printed and then inked up and then used once. And the expansion and contraction of the water in the paper gives this blurry sort of light leak type of photograph at the very end. And this is actually a photo of a wood near my parents' house that has been ecologically pretty much destroyed because there's been Japanese pine beetles that have been invasive. It's an invasive species which has killed all the pine trees. So it's kind of a jungle now. So that's what that photo is. This one is actually on panel. This is some of the pine trees that have died from that process. So I had that photo there to kind of lead into this. These are actually the remnants of those trees. So the pine beetles will eat away the sapwood from these trees and leave this column of bark. And you can actually split the bark open on really large trees and lay it out flat on a panel and then glue it down using beeswax. And I use the beeswax from local apiaries in my area. And that's just beeswax and pine bark. And what I'm highlighting is all the lightning strike looking runs where all the beetles have eaten away the inside of the bark, and you see all the beetle holes, and it's really beautiful. I mean, I like the actual lobes of the bark. And this is actually the size of it. So you can see the size. I accidentally cropped the photo, so you can actually see the area around that it's actually like a very large work. And this is some of my more recent work. This is a sculpture named Topography. This is a casting made of fiberglass of like a boot print and soil that's in Brooklyn near the Pfizer building. It's, I think, in Broadway Triangle, Brooklyn. I got like a big mold and then molded out this fiberglass area. And all the soil that was trapped in that mold, because fiberglass will and polyester resin will really grab everything, is trapped in that mold. And this is the final result. So it's the kind of square chunk of ecologically damaged earth. So a lot of my work has to do with speculative futures, like what is Earth going to be like in 100 years, 1,000 years, 5,000 years. So that's what I'm playing with more and more in these works. So it's like a little searchlight on this barren spot of Earth that I'm creating. And there's another photo. So this is a higher resolution, cleaner photo of that. So I wanted to give you a photo of the light. So you'd have like that searchlight effect, but this one shows more of the texture on top. And this is the texture on top. So it's another photo. This one was actually taken right when I finished it. So this is another work. This is, I think, one of my first large scale public installation works. I made this in Morongo Valley, California. This one is called Morongo Valley. So what I did is I got found all these in situ stones and highlighted them by excavating or building up circles around them. So some of these were excavated, and it was only using water and this natural clay. So it was just a bucket of water and me out there in 120-degree heat in this summer building this installation. So it turned out to be very big, but this is the center of it. You can roll. another, yeah. So this is the center of it. This one was shot by drone. I think it was about 15 feet wide and about 20 to 25 feet long. So this is the center where it's all very densely populated with these excavated stones. And then some of them are quite far away, about 25 feet from that area. That's another photo, just showing some of it. And this is the environment because it's in the Mojave Desert. And it was actually quite green for summer. Normally it's not quite that green. It's pretty hot.
Is that the last image on this?
I think it is slide 15. I think that's the last.
Fantastic. It's just gorgeous work. And it's still technically currently on view, right? I mean, you can put maybe the link to the exhibition. It's called Art Off Screen in the chat.
And it's ephemeral. So next time it rains, it'll be gone. But next time it rains, it gets, Mojave Desert gets 2 inches a year. So it might be out there for a while.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I love the fact that this whole presentation, generally speaking, we get together in person and get to see each other and get to sort of like exchange information. But in this way, it was kind of like even more in depth. Like now you all really know each other's work, which is pretty exciting to me. And one of the points of the exhibition is to actually have all of the new members experience each other's work and sort of introduce you to the community. So I think that this, you know, it really did that. All of the presentations are so fascinating. I'm a little scared about how awesome you all are. It's a little frightening to me. I love it so much. So we have just about 5 more minutes in the whole presentation, and we didn't have a ton of folks join us, but the good news is that all of this footage will be, or all this video will be available on our website. So if other people, if you want to direct other people to come and sort of watch the presentations, you can do that. But if anybody does have a question, or even if you all have questions for each other, I think that would be amazing. Because I love the fact that there are these really kind of lovely crossovers between so many, you know, all of your work actually does touch upon each other's work. So there's moments of crossover that I think are really exciting. And so, yeah, even if you have comments for each other, or if anybody wants to ask anything, please go ahead. We're a small group, so you can just unmute yourself and say, hey. And again, from my perspective, it was a pleasure being able to work with all of you and get to, you know, talk to you, come up with different ideas for how we can install work. And there were so many of you that made new work for the show, which was also really exciting. I think pretty much it was like half or more than half of people made new work for the show. So that was really great.
So I have a question for Katya, actually, because I discovered this play form thing also, although I haven't tried it yet. And I'm wondering if you have any control over how this thing is learning what it's learning based on what you're inputting into it, or I haven't quite figured out how to approach it yet.
Yeah, you do have control by what you give it, what kind of imagery. The surprising part of it is that it will do what it does because it is a software. Mm-hmm. But it is pretty vast. It's actually, I call her, she went to art school, she did her MFA because she's trained in art history. So she's been fed 30,000 images minimum of art historical references. So she has that in there. But you can control what you feed it, but you can't fully control the outcome until you train her more and more and more. Uh-huh. It takes hours, so it's kind of training models, you know, you train her and then you can use that model to produce new work. So you kind of train her to be almost you And so my final image, what I showed some of the images, that those are kind of final that came back to me and look more like my paintings than what I fed her initially almost. So, but there are surprises. There are many surprises because you don't know what's going to happen. And that's kind of what I like about it, is that it is its own mind.
Did you feed images that were roughly in the same style?
Same style? Well, yes, you do. But I made a lot of projects. You basically start up a project, you feed it minimum 30 images. You can mash it up. It's called Creative Morph. You can morph with other 30 images. And then in an hour, you can see what happens with those two merged. And she produces thousands of images. So it's kind of almost like you can see their
progression.
And you can choose in any of those what you like as your final. I would download them all and feed it back to her and do another project and do more mashups with totally new. But each project has a style. Otherwise, it's confusing and it gets kind of you don't get great results if it's not the same style per project. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, that's very helpful to know because I've been thinking of feeding some of my older self-portraits and also some of the older sex pictures in it and seeing what it does.
It's a really interesting, it's also constantly developing. I was the first resident, so they're currently calling for the next residency. It's every month. And I'm doing a webinar next Tuesday and then opening the show on Artsy. So I will talk about the whole process.
Oh, great.
And, Carl Aganis and like all these people.
That's how I found out about it from Carl.
Exactly. That's how I found out too. So they have done the beta testing, like the early stages.
Right.
And they have webinars on YouTube. So you can I watched them all. You can watch what they did, how they went through the whole. It's a really fascinating process. I'm still working with it. It's kind of, the residency gives you unlimited credits. So you can do as many as you like for a month. And then they pay also. So I highly recommend
Playworks?
Playworks?
Called Playform.
Playform, yeah. I'm gonna put it in here.
Put it in the chat because I've never heard of this.
Because I'd already read up on doing it, but I hadn't yet started. Like I was gathering images to stick in it. Yeah.
You can definitely set up your own free account. It's free to join, and there are free credits to use. And then there are levels of you can pay for more credits as you go. So it's kind of, and the residency just gives you for a month. It's online residency. So it's a nice, you have meetings with them all the time. You have meetings with the founders, so they explain to you. So it's an interesting, kind of totally different approach, but it's the right way, the right time to launch this platform for them because we're all on screen.
Yes, yeah. We're all curious about what it'll do.
So I just put it in the chat room if anyone wants to check it out.
I have.
Sort of like speculative space that's going on between like Alan's contemplating what will the planet look like in 100 years or more. Susan thinking about, well, what happens if we download our, sort of minds into the machine. And, I think that there's a lot of this sort of, questioning about what our futures hold because it's quite frankly very tenuous at this moment. And a little bit unknown. So it's an interesting space to kind of think about.
So I put tickets Eventbrite for the Zoom webinar that I'm doing for guests from the future webinar exhibition thing. So anyone wants to join to find out more about this, I don't know, new thing.
Yeah, great. Okay, so we're right at 8:30. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments or wanting? Again, I think that this was just wildly enjoyable for me as someone who's had individual conversations with each of you, but then to really hear it on this level, on this scale, it's just mind-blowing. I think that the work we have at the exhibition is absolutely wild. Everyone should, make sure that people come to see the show. It will be up through December. So we do have some time for people to show up. And just keep reminding people if they haven't come to see the shows. The Immigrant Artist Biennial 2 is up through, what day is it exactly that it closes?
This Saturday is the last day to see.
Oh, this Saturday's the last day. Okay, well, in any case, hopefully
I mean, it's not, the biennial is up there as virtual exhibition. Actually, Nazanin is in one of them online. So we have a virtual website that's until basically end of the year, until 18th of December, and we'll have virtual events ongoing for that. But the physical exhibition at EFA is closing Saturday with an event as part of 6 to 8 Zoom event from the gallery with performances, pre-recorded performances. And catalog, we're also launching a catalog for it, online PDF catalog, but yeah, so come to that.
Thank you so much, Katya. And thank you so much to everyone, brilliant minds, everyone's amazing. I'm amazed. It's great. And also, anyways, in the building and would like to have a beverage with me, socially distanced with masks, and I'm in the third floor office, so come on by. Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for everyone for your attention, and we'll see you sometime soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.